This is the Outskirts Podcast with Tanner and Friends, and in this episode, we are introducing a new format we're calling Interesting Interviews, by which we hope to facilitate discussions with people who we find interesting because of their experiences, areas of expertise, or points of view, which may or may not align with our own. We hope to incorporate these interviews on a semi-regular basis while continuing to collect and produce amazing stories told in the first person by you, our listeners. But for now, please enjoy this interview with a very interesting person, Mr. William Ramsey. Warning. Themes and content addressed in this discussion delve deeply into the realm of conspiracy theory and verified conspiracy fact. The discussion that follows may elicit unwanted emotional responses in those who are easily triggered by viewpoints conflicting with their own. If that's you, do yourself a favor and just skip this one. We'll still be friends. William Ramsey, you are a podcaster, an author, researcher. You're also an attorney. At what point did you leave the practice of law and switch gears more into research and reporting?
Good question. I think I probably lasted about 5 years and then kind of wanted to do something else. I mean, I was kind of burnt out when I was done in 98 after I was in DC too. That was a bit of an eye-opening experience. So then when I got into the practice, I was kind of like, is this really what I want to do? So I left, but I was always researching. Like I was researching even when I was in law school. There was a lot of the history that I didn't know, and I had a decent amount of reading in history, and a lot of things weren't covered by the corporate media. So, I was being propagandized, I think we all are. So I was really trying to figure out, is some of this stuff real? Is there evidence for it? Can you actually reference the evidence? So I really kind of went off and was reading all the time. And I would read a lot of, alternate media from the 90s. A lot of different things, non-corporate. There were other people out there in the field. I used to read anti-war, a lot of what really happened.
So when you say, are some of these things actually real? By these things, we're talking about what would be termed conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Nowadays.
I think it's an inappropriate label. I think that some of the theoretical, I was trying to prove that theories were real. So a lot of these conspiratorial events are real. JFK.
So what was the entry point for you where you first thought maybe some of these things actually are real?
I think it was being in DC. So you actually see things going on. So I saw it from the inside. I saw a lot of corruption. I saw the drunks. I saw the sex tests. I actually was in the House of Representatives building, and I had a friend who worked for a congressman, and they had me deliver important papers to this guy who was from Oregon at the time. And they said, just don't worry, I'm larger than your average bear. So they just said, don't ask questions, just go deliver this. And I found out later that if any other member of Congress would send a woman on there, he would just give her the octopus treatment. So that's why they sent me. So there was just things like that I saw. I worked during law school, so I worked right on the Hill. I was actually a server at this Mexican restaurant. So I'd see these guys come in and drink double scotches at lunch. And it was amazing, too. Like there was one guy from Florida. He was wasted all day. And then I saw his picture that they sent him back. He was from like Central Florida or Orlando. And he looked prim and proper and everything. I'm like, wow, they must put him together to send him back home. You see things in there. I worked briefly on the Vince Foster case.
Vince Foster was a boyhood friend of former President Bill Clinton. He served as deputy White House counsel in the first 6 months of the Clinton administration. In a resignation letter found after his death, he wrote, "The Wall Street Journal editors lie without consequence," and "I was not meant for the job or the spotlight of public life in Washington. Here, ruining people is considered sport." He died by suicide at the age of 48.
So I knew a lot of the people. I knew a guy by the name of Patrick Knowlton who passed away. His lawyer was John Clark. I worked for him. I interned for him. I actually delivered the addendum for the Starr report to a lot of the members of Congress. So I was kind of in that alternate space, even as a dumb law student. So I would say that that was it. So that was always, I was always curious. And there was bodies popping up in DC all the time that never made the news, very suspicious deaths. People would fall out of buildings or get run over, even though those things are never reported. It was a very heady environment. There's a lot of power games and things like that going on there, a lot of blackmail, even
Yeah.
before Epstein. So that would be like really the beginning. And I'd watch the media and go, wow, these guys are either working for these guys, and it's panned out to be all factual that they're members of either party, or they're, the party politics are putting these people into places, positions of power. So that would be why I was alternate, and that's kind of just was it. I was really, by the time I published my first book in 2010, I had years of reading and writing in the under. I'm 54 now, so I'd already had years of kind of alternate stuff. But I think that's really kind of really where it started. It's probably like the scales came off my eyes when I was in my mid 20s, and I was still willing to read the articles and talk to people. There were all kinds of JFK analysts when I was younger would talk about it, and everybody thought something was sketchy. Now with the internet, I think everybody knows that a lot of the cover stories are lies. JFK was, assassinated by other members of the family. It was a coup. So,
Right. Yeah. So that's kind of the entry point for me into governmental conspiracy theory, at least. It causing me maybe first to ponder whether or not I can actually trust the people who are governing me, you know? And I never even actually watched the Oliver Stone film. I've been kind of following Bobby Kennedy's son throughout the COVID deal, and his position on vaccines has been really enlightening and interesting to me. But listening to him talk about his dad and his uncle, he recommended a book. I sh
how about a lie too big to fail? No, that's
no,
this piece. Is it unspeakable? It's probably unspeakable.
Unspeakable.
By
Yeah,
Doug.
that was it. And
I recommend that book too. It's good.
it was really revelatory for me, and it seemed well researched, and the arguments were very well founded. And it just left me again with just this horrible disgust and a disillusionment and a feeling of powerlessness, and just a bafflement at people's willingness to just not care. I don't understand why people aren't in the streets right now saying they killed our president, you know?
You're disincentivized. There's all kinds of things they can do to maintain social control. So, I mean, that story really, I mean, they fought to get the real reality of that story out for decades. So, there were a lot of people involved in that. And it was probably pretty perilous I mean, it was. There's so many dead bodies around the JFK murder. Hundreds, I think. 50 is probably too low. So many
Yeah.
mysterious deaths and stuff. So there was a lot of social control involved. And you're dealing with very heavy duty guys, man. Dulles and Rockefellers, all these people are surrounding this whole thing, the Rockefeller Foundation, and they did not want the truth to come out because people would riot, probably would riot. But I think time has passed and the ability to control discourse is diminished. But and people have written books. I mean, it was a real tragedy for the whole country because I do think JFK, for all of his faults, and he was flawed, really was trying to ramp down this crazy rhetoric of nuclear war and conflict and trying to come to terms with things and have detente and lessen the missile crisis.
It's an important message. It's relevant now, I would say.
Well, the
That's
U.S. has
another,
been warmongering since the end of World War II, so we've had a nice many decades of warmongering. Yeah, so we've been at war for a long time. Not
yeah,
quite.
Vietnam, obviously that was related to the motivation
Absolutely.
in Kennedy's assassination. And the resistance to that was subverted by maybe the CIA through occultists like Timothy Leary. Is that kind of the idea that the genuine resistance to Vietnam was kind of hijacked by the hippie culture movement?
I think so. I think it was used to subvert it. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Tune in, drop out, tune out, drop in. What was it?
something
Yeah.
like that.
So
Yeah.
you're supposed to drop out of the system so you stop fighting. But there was a
Yeah.
huge, very powerful anti-Vietnam. I think to the benefit of this country, like Vietnam was just a war of choice. That was a disaster. If you don't comply with the U.S. state, they call you a communist, even if you're not. And then that's the reason to go in. We got to get rid of it. So, yeah, it's a disaster. So many people died. There were so many people sent off. We talk about like we lost 50,000 in Vietnam, which is a disaster. It was a cultural disaster, a social disaster. The U.S. killed millions of people there. They power bombed. There were like 2 million Vietnamese dead, huge amounts of strife and carpet bombing of Laos and Cambodia. It was a disaster. It was a disaster. Like all these kids got chewed up in this big power play too. Like the average kid in Vietnam was 19, usually from a poor country, a poor part of the U.S. They were not people could get. I think they're like 5 or 6 people from Ivy League schools who died in Vietnam. So all these poor kids without the resources got ramped up and sent over there to die for nothing, absolutely nothing. And they made a lot of money, like Bell Helicopter and stuff. That's all tied into Johnson. All this, he had all his friends at Brown and Root and all these other places. That was his thing. So the
Yeah.
war benefited those guys.
Yeah.
Johnson died with tons of money. He never really had a job, but he had millions and millions of dollars. Like he made tons of money at a ranch and all this stuff. Nobody knows where his money came from. So
The Gulf of
Andrew,
Tonkin incident, right?
yeah,
Is that
everything.
verifiably a false flag event? Is that,
Yeah,
or
absolutely, no doubt. Tonkin, and then he did the USS Liberty. He was involved in all kinds of scurrilous stuff, like really crazy stuff. Murders. There's so many murders underneath him. You can probably lay the murder of MLK under him pretty close.
mm,
They were definitely harassing him. He was good friends with J. Edgar Hoover, which is really weird. Like he had very interesting friends in weird places you wouldn't expect for a guy kind of from rural Texas. But he was really a piece of work, man. He was really super racist. Yeah, there was like parts of his own biographer. Was it Robert Caro? Like he'd say the N word to people to their face. Just really.
would you say he was just a controllable figure? He was an owned figure. He wasn't there because of any other reason than he was going to bend to the will of whoever was creating the agenda.
I think that he was just a manipulator, and so there was an interest for him, and other people had interest in the. A lot of people wanted JFK dead, so when they had a line of succession. So when he got, they go Johnson, he'll be in there and he'll cover it up, and we'll control him, and he'll put whoever we want onto the Warren Commission, and he can bully everybody, and
He had
that's really what happened.
the right mix of ambition and
Ruthlessness,
ruthlessness. Yeah,
cunning, murder.
yeah.
He'd already had tons of murders in Texas. His sister died suspiciously. There were all these people who died suspiciously there. So they knew who he was. They knew he rigged elections. They knew everything. So he was their man.
Would you say that
Yeah.
there's been sort of a consistency in regime since World War II? Since when?
I don't know. It's hard to say. There's been very different. I mean, Truman to Eisenhower, right, to JFK.
Yeah, just regarding JFK, which is why they killed him, I guess, maybe. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, Eisenhower, nobody was going to touch him. He was kind of untouchable because as a warrior. But I think he was there seeing this growth. He okayed a lot of pretty heavy duty stuff like the Operation Ajax, which is the overthrow of Mossadegh. And I think he was involved in what it went down in Guatemala, one of the countries, Honduras. So these overthrows, like he was involved in that. But he gave his famous kind of military industrial complex speech.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
So to say that, I don't know. I think that the power structure is what stayed the same. Maybe the president's changed it, but that power structure was always there. It always wanted to get fed. So I think that's really it. I mean, you have this huge, multinational, it's not even the military industrial. It's just a whole, Wall Street needs to dip its beak. So if people screw up with that, if any president screws up with that, they're in deep trouble.
it's still mind-blowing that he was executed in the street, in public, on TV.
Several shots were fired as President Kennedy's motorcade passed through downtown Dallas. The crowd screamed and lay down on the grass. As the motorcade went by, it was not known if the shots were aimed at the president. Repeat, it is not known if the shots were aimed at the president.
Here is a flash from the Associated Press, Dateline Dallas. 2 priests who were with President Kennedy say he is dead of bullet wounds.
Well, it's an interesting thing you say that, because he was not in great health. And they knew that he took shots from Dr. Feelgood and he was getting monitored for Haddison's. They probably could have just had somebody in there and just lace his food or do something like that.
Right, yeah.
I don't think that was it. I think the point was to humiliate him and have a very powerful public ritual. And I think it was. So they blew his head off, and then they had this huge event over those 4 days. Remember, there's only 3 major public stations: ABC, NBC, CBS.
Yeah.
So when he got shot, I think on a Friday, and then I think it was Tippit got shot too, and then on the Sunday, then Lee Harvey Oswald's drag out and shot by Ruby, and that was just like a whole weekend, this whole massive display. So you can see the similarities between the JFK killing and 9/11, where you just had people walked in, and there's this huge melodrama of the killing the king. And there's the little John comes out and this says it. And so the whole country is just totally involved in that, and fed the lie that Oswald was a communist sympathizer. It was super powerful. Now, I think all 3 of them got buried on a Monday. So Tippit, JFK, and Oswald were all put in the ground the next day. Yeah, incredible.
And then the same thing happened to his brother. Well, a similar thing. Who obviously wasn't president yet, but yeah, it's just...
Their people hated the Kennedys, man. They were just not part of the structure. They were wealthy. The dad was, a talented financier, but Irish, Catholic, they just were not... They were oil and water to kind of the old WASP elite.
They weren't in the society?
Just think that they weren't really accepted members, and I think they always felt it. So yeah. There were just always tensions between them. So I think that it grew to this terrible, disastrous end. I mean, that's why they were on the left, I think. And they just were like, 2 different magnets you could never really attach, where all these other guys were. And it was kind of a, ethno control of all these usually WASPs who could get along with each other. And then here comes these guys who aren't listening. I'm not going to support you at the Bay of Pigs. I'm not going to go through these notions of power. I don't trust you guys at the CIA. So that's just driving these other people who used to being, pulling all the strings of power, we're pulling it in a big way around the country and the world. They're like, oh, this isn't good for us. I mean, the firing of Dulles, he was part of the power structure going back all the way, he and his brother, right? So it was Sullivan and Cromwell, that's the big white shoe Wall Street firm. So they're all connected with the Wall Street and Intel. And Dulles is just a heavy hitter on so many different things. So he knew all the paperclip people.
Project Paperclip was a secret intelligence gathering operation by which nearly 2,000 German scientists, engineers, and technicians, many of whom were formerly members or leaders of the Nazi Party, were relocated to the United States for government employment.
Yeah, it was an incredible time, really, in the United States history.
What do you think Kennedy was talking about in his famous speech, where he talked about the unseen...
The monolithic...
Yeah.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. It conducts the Cold War, in short, with a wartime discipline no democracy would ever hope or wish to match.
I think he was intimating that there was a secret kind of cabal behind things. I think he was right. I don't trust anything that comes out of government. I've seen it from the inside. They're very corrupt and self-dealing. And I think this whole COVID event is a perfect example that they will screw the entire population to make a buck. And those are the kind of people who stayed in DC. Like, I knew from a year when I was there, I was getting out of there. Like, I did not want to stay there.
The type of people who the system is rigged to favor a certain type of personality, and the system at large, I guess. There are good people winning small victories here and there all over the place.
I agree.
But in general, it's a fallen world, right? So,
Yeah, I think so.
kind of segueing into the world of magic, I guess magic with a K. That's the kind of stuff that I always had an interest in. Maybe Lewis would say I have an unhealthy or an unsafe interest in it. How he describes it in Screw Tape Letters is, you can fault on either side. Either you're a naturalist or you're in danger of becoming a magician. I've never dabbled, but I enjoy hearing about it. I'm a person of faith, and for me, faith is a hard one thing. It's a thing to be lived, and as the book says, it's a thing to be worked out with fear and trembling, right? So there aren't a lot of shortcuts in the biblical route to faith. Whereas I think, on the other hand, as one who believes in a spiritual realm and in a spiritual darkness, and then maybe even, it's the right way to describe it, Lucifer, a corporeal evil, I think that there are displays of power that are on display if you know where to look. I think that's been my experience. I've seen things, and I've collected stories of this type that, on the one hand, it's been an affirmation of my faith. And then on the other hand, I kind of get what feels like an unhealthy rush out of it. Why do we like scary stories? I'm sure it has to do with death and the desire to transcend death and all of that. All things that Christ is supposed to provide for the Christian. A walk and a hard-won victory, I guess, would be how I describe it, to live as Christ.
There's a lot of forces against you. No question.
Yeah, so I've just been kind of struggling with that. I don't know why I didn't intend to say all this, but if we could just talk about your areas of research in the realm of the occult.
Yeah, I didn't know much about the occult. I was never an occultist. I never practiced. I was never interested. I had always seen names around, and I know that those sections were in bookstores. I worked in libraries. I knew about that stuff, but I really went in deep. I came out of 9/11, really, because there was all kinds of strange, weird numerology in 9/11. These numbers, the repeats of these numbers were beyond the realm of, probability. It was, improbability. They had to be there for a reason. So that was really it. So that's kind of like through 9/11, and that led me to Crowley. And then I just kind of expanded kind of naturally on that. It was almost like God laid it out in front of me, because I studied Crowley. I put out Prophet of Evil in 2010. And then I ran into the West Memphis 3 case, which was huge in the news and kind of still is around. And that led me to actually seeing this kind of real application of Crowley's ideas and network of these people. There's no question there's a network. So that was actually happened when I was trying to write the follow-on book to Prophet of Evil, which is Children of the Beast. That was 2014. So that really just kind of opened my eyes to different areas within the occult, and is it real, and are these people serious? And for me, it was all verified. Like, it's real, they're serious, they're writing, they're looking for followers just as much as any Christian church would do it, and they're networked. So I think that was it. I tried to understand. I'd never really kind of looked at Crowley trying to understand his magic. Like, I've never really transposed his rituals and stuff like that. So I looked at it much more objectively, kind of from a historical, cultural level, and it led up to my last book, 2021, which was Global Death Cult, about the Order of Nine Angles. I knew nothing about them, but they're having real world effects. People are dying all over the world because of these guys' ideas. And it's in the common culture now too, because I've been writing about like Ed Sheeran stuff.
It's kind of in the general awareness as far as Super Bowl halftime shows, and
they're initiating the world into it, as much as possible. So you see the people at the highest levels of the culture, and probably politics, they're probably all occultists. I think that was the Pizzagate or the Podesta email showed that this woman Abramovich is all over the place. She's in high fashion, she's in politics, she's with the elite, she's holding weird public so-called quote art. unquote thing. So it's happening. Like it's not really believable. It's kind of fairly recent in our culture, maybe since the 60s, but the real predominant religion at the top is the occult. You're swimming in the occult. So it's kind of interesting to see that happen and not have the kind of intellectual class actually look at that, which I think is a willful blindness. It's not popular. It's definitely not within the Overton window of acceptable discourse. But I was willing to I didn't really have much at stake. So I wasn't even really that public of a person. So I didn't really care. I just saw what I saw and I just wrote it down.
To what extent do you think that viewing these occult activities and symbology as art kind of helps keep the reality of their belief system suppressed or degenerated to a view of something that, maybe they have a painting on their wall or a sculpture, or they'll have a social event, a spirit cooking, and that's just good fun and that's art and it's nothing more than that. That seems like it seems to be how they want to talk about it, how it's discussed, right?
It's for public consumption saying that stuff. I think those are all introductory. I think she probably knows tons of ritual magic. You've looked there, I've seen a picture of her sex magic, literal nudity and stuff like that that's suppressed. So I know she goes deep. In her autobiography, she's communicating with spirits from the very beginning. I think a lot of these guys would like the public to use words like dabbler, entertain. But some of these people like her, she is into blood and pentagrams, the whole bit. Just like Eccles, that's their religion. Whatever it costs, blood, whatever they're told. So I think it's very convenient for her to just call it art, because then people can interpret it art, and then the people who know magic know exactly what she's up to. She's practicing ritual magic and all kinds of magical techniques with a K. So I'm not deceived. I know what she's doing.
In response to questions about occult and contemporary art, Abramovic said, "Everything depends on which context you are doing and what you are doing. If you are doing the occult magic in the context of art or in a gallery, then it is the art. If you are doing it in a different context, in spiritual circles or private house or on TV shows, it is not art. The intention, the context for what is made, and where it is made defines what art is or is not." You had a great conversation with Joe Atwell on the occulted 20th century, and
Yeah.
he seemed to recognize that these things were happening, but he referred to it as sort of a bamboozlement. He kind of wrote it all off as just a distraction, as if it were thrown out for the masses to say, "Oh, they're just doing occultic things," but really the goal was for Marxism to take root somehow.
Right, something else. Yeah, it was all kind of like a camouflage, like that was his interpretation. I don't have that interpretation. I think those guys, like Hitler, was a full-on occultist. You could call him that. I think that's fair. He called himself a pagan, and how the paganistic worldview and occultism overlap, I think, they overlap a lot. So I didn't agree with that. Well, I don't agree with that. Well, on Caesar's Messiah either. His anti-Christian thing where the Flavian dynasty invented it. It's ahistorical. The historical record and the founding father, the church fathers some of those guys were like directly affiliated with some of the apostles. Like they tied themselves to John the Apostle. So he ignored that in there. Maybe I have to get through his whole book, but yeah. His view is kind of like the other view of Crowley and all these other things. That Crowley is like his whole magical world is a cover for his intelligence, right?
Right.
Instead of he is an occultist acting like his intelligence. So it's inverted in my mind. But in other people's, I get that question all the time. How serious is Crowley? What's his intelligence? Isn't this just a cover for his intelligence? But all Crowley was doing from the time he left Cambridge to his death was practicing magic and building this thing. He was the head of the OTO and other groups. So to say that he was a dabbler or this was some kind of like camouflage, and we can get into the double helix of occultism and intelligence in the 20th century or something, because it is a double helix. A lot of those guys in Intel are occultists, whether they're, if you want to call the occult Masonry or something, which I would call occult. It's really a matter of definition, but Masons are all over the place.
Secret
Skull and
knowledge,
Bones, yeah. When Truman signed the National Security Act in 1947, there were like 4 Skull and Bonesmen right behind him, people who'd been initiated in the crypt. People had literally urinated on them.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go
I'm
wild.
sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322.
Like, you're telling me that this isn't some kind of important connection, or there's some meaning between these people and intelligence and the CIA? Give me a break. George
What
Bush
purpose?
was
What
one of
purpose
them.
would it serve? Yeah, other than to cast suspicion on them.
Right,
It'd
but
be
you
better
have
to be a fake Presbyterian than to be a fake occultist, right?
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, so some of that thinking to me is odd, because you had to have the will. Like Crowley always talked about the will. You have to have the will, and Hitler too. You have to have the will to do that. So where do you get that kind of perverse will? Because if you're in the Christian church, it's God's will always. You're always, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy will be done, right? So that will, and then you see this kind of evil will through the CIA all over the world. I mean, really, the U.S. was left in the position that Hitler wanted to be in, which was full global domination. I don't know if there was any country we weren't meddling with, and they had the will to do it. So, and still to this day, I mean, we're kind of in the end of the empire. I think is close. It could be within this month, actually, once people start dumping the American dollar and we go into hyperinflation. Like, people are going to be shocked. We're going to be back in post-World War I Germany. It's never good.
Do you think right now we're experiencing kind of the fallout of the implementation of Ordo ab Chea or Solvet Coagula? Is that?
I don't know. Well, I could say that we're kind of at the end of the American empire. If you have that much debt and you're meddling around in wars and conflicts that are unnecessary and that are actually going to facilitate your demise, you're at the end of empire. We're tinkering around on a border war we should have nothing to do with in Ukraine. It doesn't make any sense unless you're super corrupt and you're laundering money through there. And you installed the guy anyway. Zelensky was installed by the CIA in a color revolution. So, and he's like oppressing all his media, much like people here in the United States. Weird, kind of tyrannical, strange.
If you look at the philosophies of these people, though, like if a lot of them are Crowleyists or a lot of them are Masons, right? If you look at Crowley's philosophy, the whole of the law, do what thou wilt, right? One clue to me about the origin of that philosophy is that as a governmental system, it kind of dies the death of its own qualification, right? The first generation that actually lives that out isn't going to be too concerned with the next one, right? It's not a self-perpetuating form of government. Do what you want, right? So it was never sustainable. So but yet it persists, right? And it's kind of adopted by these, I guess, the Marxist governments that we kind of hear about. And I thought, how could they be so minded on the future when they don't believe in the spirit? The selfish people that I know in life, they have a hard time planning for the future, much less the next generation.
Right.
So it just seemed like they would have a hard time, having
And they don't. I don't think they care.
agenda.
Yeah, they don't have they may have a long-term agenda, but it's not for stability and security, right?
Right. So it could either be to create
yeah.
chaos, or they could be acting out the agenda of the one that's giving them power. Are the two things that I kind of think about.
That's what I would say is happening. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that a lot of these people are Luciferians, Satanists. I mean, I know the Lucis Trust exists, right? So I was just watching a Lucis Trust, Alice Bailey, the Maitreya, their Christ. They're not a Jesus Christ, by the way. It's their Christ. But they're involved with the WEF. They're doing like meditation practicing and supporting them for the implementation of the Great Reset. So it's all spiritual, but it's satanic. It's Luciferian. So there's a lot of people out there like that. And I think the effects are just catastrophic, really. You can see this through the mass poisoning, through the COVID shots, and the breakdown of borders and laws. Here in the States, I mean, I don't even know if we're a constitutional republic anymore. It's arguable. We certainly don't seem to be talking about the Constitution if people's First Amendment rights are being violated or abnegated. So anyway, there's definitely a spiritual war going on, and they believe in their spirit. They believe in, Lucifer as the great knowledge bringer serpent. The Lucis Trust is right there in the mix still today, 2023, no question. Nope.
Weren't they a publishing house? I've heard
yeah,
that
they
name
used
before.
to be called Lucifer Trust, I think, but it was Alice Bailey. She was she became kind of a spiritualist, and she started receiving books from Ra or something, Kumi. It was kind of like Crowley's thing, but the Ascended Master, she's like part of the Ascended Master tradition. So she was receiving this, and she received these books. And it's all about globalism, breaking down a thing. They have a special UN. I think they have an affiliation with the UN. So the Lucis Trust is still around. I forgot what her name is. Christine Morgan. She's the president of the Lucis Trust, and she had a
Okay.
video in 2021. Really, I mean, it's a remarkable interview. She admits so much. I mean, but people get deceived because they use terms from Christianity, but they are different meaning. But she says, "Who is Lucifer, the shining one?" Cross text. He's the beginning of self-consciousness, evolution, and initiation. So she lays it down, but it's kind of in a benign way. Instead of having kind of like the caricature of a Satanist, a bald-headed guy with a beard or whatever, she's like this a nice, amiable-looking housewife type, but heavy-duty stuff.
I'll have to look into that further. From luciustrust.org. The Lucius Trust has consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, and World Goodwill, an affiliated group, is recognized by the Department of Global Communications at the United Nations as a non-governmental organization. As such, the Trust and World Goodwill are part of a community of many hundreds of NGOs that play an active role in the UN, particularly in spreading information about the UN and fostering support for UN programs. Since their inception, Lucius Trust and World Goodwill have given their support through meditation, educational materials, and seminars by highlighting the importance of the UN's goals and activities as they represent the voice of the peoples and nations of the world. Also from luciustrust.org. The Great Invocation. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ, with an asterisk, return to earth. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Asterisk. Many religions believe in a world teacher, a coming one, knowing him under such names as Lord Maitreya, the Imam Mahdi, the Kalki Avatar, and the Bodhisattva. These terms are sometimes used in versions of the Great Invocation for people of specific faiths. As a mantra for the New Age, luciustrust.org explains, the Great Invocation is a world prayer translated into over 80 languages and dialects. It was given to Alice Bailey in April 1945 in a message for all people of goodwill. Its central truths are stated as being the truth of the existence of a basic intelligence to whom we vaguely give the name of God, the truth that behind all outer seeming the motivating power of the universe is love. The truth that a great individuality, called by Christians the Christ, came to earth and embodied that love so that we could understand. The truth that both love and intelligence are effects of what is called the will of God. And finally, the self-evident truth that only through humanity itself can the divine plan work out. On the Lucius Events calendar, spiritual festivals are chronologued in accordance with moon phases. It states, the full moons can be observed as a series of 12 spiritual festivals when the moon is out of the way, allowing for a full inflow of the light of the sun onto the earth. Moon charts and meeting schedules are available. A description of the full moon meditation is as follows. Meditators can use the opportunities of the 12 spiritual festivals to invoke and distribute lighted energies of divinity as an act of service to humanity. On the subject of automatic writing or downloaded books, like in the style of
Received books, yeah.
Received books, yeah. That's another topic that I find really
There's
interesting.
a lot of them. There's a lot of them.
Yeah. So Crowley had his, right?
Right.
And then before Crowley, there was Blavatsky.
Blavatsky, right.
And her book was, what was
there
the
are
book?
two, The Secret Doctrine and ISIS Unveiled.
Okay.
Hitler had the book, supposedly The Secret Doctrine, by his bedside and got a lot of his information from him. You see the overlap between Blavatsky, the root races, the Aryans are at the top. There's, it's kind of like a caste system that she had.
So you see kind of all over the place this general acceptance of what maybe they wouldn't call it supernatural. They might say there's interdimensional beings and they apologize for themselves with string theory or something. But really, it's no more abstract to us than a biblical narrative. The idea that there are angels, demons, a supreme creator. They've
Right.
just
Yeah, they have a spiritual worldview.
they
It's
have a
just
spiritual
different.
worldview. They just
Yeah,
don't.
yeah.
I'm thinking of this C.S. Lewis book, The Hideous Strength, where he talks about the progression of basically he takes you from these atheistic and naturalistic college campuses and the professors who don't really have a devotion to truth. They're just in it for prestige and power. And then as their Marxism kind of flails and it dies on its own merits, then there's a resurgence of this supernatural element, and all of a sudden they're promoting paganism and witchcraft,
Right.
and
Yeah, it's
that's
cyclical.
kind of
I think
what's
it's
it's kind of
cyclical.
what's happening, right? He was
Yeah,
prophetic in that way.
yeah, no doubt. I was told that here in LA, the number one religion among teenage girls is Wicca, is witchcraft. So that's the kind of the new resurgence.
This episode of the Outskirts podcast with Tanner and friends was brought to you in part by Felix's non-denominational hex removal services. Hello?
Hello, Tanner. Are you feeling a little under the weather? Before you meet your end, I wanted you to know that it was I who hexed you. Your last moments are sure to be filled with terror. My sisters and I performed a little blood ritual last night to seal your fate. Be sure to scream loud enough for us to savor your agony.
Dang it. Jeez. Which voice texted you? Dang, she hexed you. Trouble, vexed you. What are you gonna do? Problems with the curse. Ex-girlfriend drives a hearse. Call Felix's non-denominational hex removal services. Word to Joel Osteen.
Go back and look at the Old Testament. It's kind of like the children of Israel are being obedient, and then they stray off to the dark gods, and then they come back, and then God says, stop messing up, come back to the straight and narrow, I'll forgive you, and then they're forgiven. And then all the prophets are always fighting against, the priest of Baal or something like that. So I would say it's probably not much different. I always liken the Old Testament to present day. It's probably the same thing. There's a lot of occultists out there, people being led astray and intentionally led astray. I think the country's been led astray from Christian values to its own detriment. I think it was very destructive. Probably was very Christian all the way up to the 50s and 60s. That was a do what thou wilt generation for sure.
Would you say that it was very Christian in spite of its origins and its founding upon Masonic principles, or?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think that you can go back. A lot of those guys Christians. Are they Masons? Are they deists? They're obviously very intelligent, but I think the population itself, if you look at de Tocqueville, like he said, the population was very well informed and very religious. That was their backbone. And a lot of those guys, Adams was like very much like, this is going to be founded on Christianity. That's what's going to keep it together. So I think that the population still to this day actually is mostly pretty religious. It's just the mass media makes you think otherwise. It actually inverts everything, kind of like Satan. But I think actually the mass media in the American country is satanic, actually, no doubt, and inverts everything. But I think the population still has a spiritual worldview. I think that they've just been force-fed a bunch of nonsense and been mind-controlled. But yeah, I think that, but everything goes in cycles. You can go through the Great Awakenings. There's been 4 Great Awakenings. They're using that term again. I don't think in the correct meaning. It's kind of like the QAnon Great Awakening meaning, but we're just in the cycle. I think a lot of people are like, look at like how dark it gets, and they're like, wow, I got to recoil from this. This is getting dark. Like you have kid drag shows being supported by the government, and they get their own protection from the police. Like that's evil. That's Sodom and Gomorrah. I don't know why they're called leftists. They're really do what thou willers. That's really it. So.
On both sides, what's referred to right or left, a lot of people probably feel like their democratic views have been hijacked by extremists or occultists even. I don't know how many people are actually talking about the influence of occult in politics.
It's not fashionable. It's not within the acceptable box of personal discourse for a reason. The occultists want to keep the information occulted. It's much like an intelligence agency. Yeah, that's the whole other thing about CIA or any intelligence agency is they want to occult their knowledge of how they're playing you using mind control, manipulation, social engineering, behavioral science. They don't want you to know any of that stuff because then you'll be like, oh, I'm aware. Then I'm inoculated against it. They don't want that. They occult all that information. The CIA knows tons of information. They have tons of information they've compiled.
This is a fascinating topic, and it's one which is increasingly relevant. If you haven't familiarized yourself with the information leaked to the public via figures such as Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, and more recently Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger, and the crushing governmental responses, then I suggest you do. Aside from the incriminating material contained within these leaks, the government attempt to control and silence dissent and overstep boundaries such as journalistic source privacy are prominent in this discussion. I recently watched the House Judiciary Subcommittee hearing on the politicization of the FBI and Justice Department, and it was disheartening. I recommend you watch it though, but be careful how you respond, because as stated in a recent tweet from Mr. Taibbi, hashtag Twitter files are revealing more every day about how the government collects, analyzes, and flags your social media content.
It's basically the CIA is kind of like Hogwarts. It's like they know everything. Drugs, manipulation, social manipulation, how to fake anything, how to overthrow governments, all the steps you got to take, all that stuff. They've got it down to a science.
And that's just behavioral science. They understand how to manipulate human beings. It makes sense that they would keep that kind of practice and the knowledge of how to manipulate secret, I guess. But it also...
Right, because then you're supposed to think this is all normal, right? They normalize that stuff. So once they lay down all that stuff, like I think the COVID protocols, there's actually a military weaponization that was used in a domestic fashion. So they could keep hammering the public and the public didn't know it. They didn't know there was a military operation against them. They're starting to figure it out. The Americans are starting to figure out that because there's a couple of really good researchers, Latipova and Watt. It's a military operation. It's a military sophisticated operation with the control over the media and totally weaponized against the American people to get them to take something that's actually against their best interest and make money and facilitate this whole breakdown of the country. So
to break the will, maybe. I keep thinking about that motto where you just, it's sort of like divide and conquer. You create chaos and then you establish the new order. There's obviously a lot of people using that terminology, the New World Order, but
what is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order.
I can look at the events of the last couple of years and see how it's sort of the culmination of the kind of thing you're talking about, this occulted belief system where their motto actually is, and I guess I'm speaking about the Masonic influence, but I don't know, maybe other mottos are kind of similar. The Baphomet, right? The Solve et Coagula, isn't that kind of a similar idea where you dissolve and then reform?
Yeah. It's a magical formula. But yeah, I think that if you look at Crowley, remember a lot of his stuff is post-Masonic. So everybody already went through Masonry. So they went through Masonry and then became a member of the Golden Dawn or the OTO or stuff like that. So what's the difference here? Who knows what some of these other things are? But I mean, I was in DC. You almost never see a picture of the House of the Temple anywhere in this country. You have to go and like look at it for yourself. It's a wonderful building. It's incredible. It's totally ornate. Somebody spent millions and millions of dollars on it. It has the two sphinxes in front, which are total magic right out of Eliphas Levi, which is to know, to will, to dare, and remain silent. So these guys know all this stuff. The public doesn't know. It's occulted knowledge.
To know, to will, to dare, to do it, and then to remain silent. Yeah, that's exactly. So doesn't it feel like that's the world we're living in, where it's just something?
That's the riddle of the Sphinx. Look it up.
Something's being pulled on us, but nobody's really fessing up to it. It does feel like often like we're living under the influence of some bad magic, some practices.
Yeah,
you know?
I think it's been happening for centuries. So,
on the issue of supernatural influence, though, magic. So it makes sense that a lot of these practitioners, whoever they are, from whatever groups, if they even work in unison, that they would do it strictly for purposes of influence, and the tactics that they're using don't necessarily have to make the leap into the realm of supernatural, right? But is there a supernatural element to this magic in some cases?
I think in their mind there is, absolutely. I think that they're trying to rely on spirits or communicate with entities and stuff like that. So it's always there. If you look through Bailey, Blavatsky, they're talking to entities. Crowley himself, I mean, I should go back down and say all the entities that he talked to. It was like 10, like different Awas and the wizard. And he had all these names for these other things that Lamb, these people he's communicating with. So I wouldn't see why some of these other people, there's nothing different.
It just hit me. So the supernatural element is the ideas came from the supernatural realm. So they're writing these books, these received books, and the information is coming from without. Is that
right?
Absolutely. So it's born. It's born of. It's
yeah.
Born
Look
from
up
these
Barbara.
entities.
Yeah, look up Barbara Marx Hubbard. Look her up. She's like wanted to kill off 1/4 of humanity, but she was an automatic writer. There's like videos of her closing her eyes and drawing, writing. And Crowley was kind of like an automatic writer. I don't know if he ever referenced himself in that regard, but he would write stuff once and then be done. But Barbara Marx Hubbard is right there connected with the UN and just like an Alice Bailey. So these received books there's a lot more of them out there. You could look at the Book of Mormon as a received book as well, which is pretty fun.
Yeah. Wow. In regards to aliens, right? So depending on how these people perceive who's speaking to them, or for Crowley, maybe it was some kind of telepathy. I'm not sure. I'm sure you do know. Or for others, it's just like a ghostly transfer of information. But for some, they're communicating with people on the backside of Mars or the moon, right? Depending on how the entities present themselves. So you have this whole UFO phenomenon. There's Jack Parsons. Didn't he claim to receive some information from
he
some
was
of those rituals
doing something called what was it called? The Babylon Working.
Alamantra.
The Alamantra was Crowley 1918.
Okay.
Where that's where he ended up drawing this lamb thing and was communicating with people.
Oh.
But Jack Parsons kind of like was supposed to be, he added on another 4th book of the Book of the Law, which didn't seem to like grip people. He also made the oath of the Antichrist, like he was going to fight against Christ forever. But he was pretty heavy. I mean, so was Hubbard too. So
do you know, did he get the information on how to mix that solid rocket fuel from outer space? Or
I don't know. I do know that he claimed that the devil, appeared to him when he was a young man. So, and Crowley called him his most important follower was Jack Parsons, the Agape Lodge. So I'd have to go back through and reread a lot of that stuff, but I did do a section on him in Children of the Beast. So I was pretty familiar with some. Yeah, Parsons. Yeah. Okay. He used to recite, when he would shoot stuff off into the sky, he'd recite Crowley's Hymn to Pan, which is kind of interesting. That's kind of Crowley's most notable, memorable poem.
I'm intrigued, but I'm not gonna look it up. I don't want to know it.
Pan is like the representation of the devil. It's like another kind of Prometheus or something like that. It's kind of like something in the Western, esoteric tradition that they use symbolizes the devil.
Yeah, he's like a fawn figure.
Yeah, it's Pan and like the pipes, and he's half goat.
So going through a chronology here, we had Blavatsky was predated Crowley. Crowley was, I guess, somewhat of a mentor figure to Parsons, or at least he acknowledged Parsons.
No doubt. Yeah, there's tons of writing in between them. They're writing to each other, stuff like that.
And then Parsons and Hubbard were kind of contemporaries, and they had a split.
Business partners, yeah, business partners. Then Hubbard ran off with Parsons' girlfriend or wife or something like that at the time.
Earlier, William made mention of Barbara Marx Hubbard. She was an American futurist, author, and the first woman to be nominated for the vice presidency of the United States on the Democratic ticket. But right now, we're talking about L. Ron Hubbard, author of notable works such as Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health, and Battlefield Earth, and founder of Scientology, of Leah Remini and Tom Cruise infamy. Oh, and Jack Parsons? He was instrumental in the founding of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory on the campus of Caltech. The JPL was a forerunner to NASA and is still in operation under the NASA umbrella today. Okay. And then, not long after they're doing these things in the desert, shooting rockets into the sky, we have the Roswell incident.
That's right. It's 47, is that right?
I think so. Was that about the time when they were?
Yeah, it was before. I think Parsons died in early 50s. Hubbard started Dianetics in 48, Scientology 50, so it was before that. It was like after the war.
Okay.
Wartime, yeah.
And so basically since then, that kind of opened the conversation about the possibility of alien life. And that's just kind of escalated since then, right? Now to where
Yeah.
you're seeing it on the news and they're not denying it. Have they flat out admitted that such things exist, or where are they with that now? Do you know?
I don't
The Air
know.
Force
I mean,
or
I guess they're saying people are seeing stuff. So what they are is another thing. I'm not the extraterrestrial person. I'm extra dimensional events because they
yeah,
they emulate kind of people's when they used to see demons back in the day. They get
that's
scared, something appears, weird things happen. They call on
yeah.
Jesus. Those things.
That's the assumption I make is that this is all demonic. For me, the Bible kind of serves as an Occam's razor in that it provides the simplest, most comprehensive explanation of kind of everything happening in the unseen realm. And it makes sense to me too, if you try to examine the enemies, what would I do if I were him? You kind of want to cover your bases because he doesn't know the mind of God. He doesn't even have the ability to probably read our minds. I don't think. He's not described as being omniscient or omnipresent, but he's been around the whole time. He probably is a pretty good predictor of future events, and if he has influence and if he's disseminating information and influencing the trajectory of science and philosophy, political philosophy, he's kind of running the show here, is the language that the Bible uses. He being Lucifer, I guess. I'm a little bit confused on the different names, Satan, Lucifer. I've heard it discussed that there might
I've
be
heard they're
multiple
different
entities.
entities. I think that they cover the same, fallen angel that Christ talked about. I saw him fall like lightning from heaven. So
Yeah.
the rebel, Satan.
That's what I roll with. There's the main adversary, and he's kind of in charge, the same one who had the power to provide Christ with the things that he offered him, right? Surely he knew Jesus would see through his lies. If he took Jesus up on a mountain and said, "I'll give you all this if you do this," I kind of tend to believe that he actually did have the power to do that. So moving
Right. He was
forward,
supposedly in the Bible, he was tempted 3 times, but then it goes on. I can't remember which gospel it was, but there's among other temptations. So we don't know the full story about what was going on. But we do know that right at the end, at the Last Supper, Satan enters into Judas, right? So there's a lot of things. And then, like Paul even says, I think it was Hymenaeus Alpha, give him over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, I think is what the quote is.
yeah.
Which is interesting. It's an interesting thing. And that's actually one of Crowley's followers. He called himself Hymenaeus Beta, like after Hymenaeus Alpha. And his name was Grady McMurtry.
Wow. So these people moving back to modern times, and just in the context of your research and in the books you've written, these occultists, I don't know if you can, I was going to say crimes aside, but I don't know if you can remove someone like Eccles from his crimes, or if it would be appropriate to talk about him apart from those crimes. But as a practitioner of magic, that's somebody who you've studied. I don't know how much of your study was aimed at the type of magic he practices and
Well, he
what
just
does he
said
expect?
recently the person who influenced him the most was Crowley and Joel Osteen, which is very strange. But he mentioned Crowley, so Crowley's like intertwined with his whole life, whether it was on the stand, whether it was after that, what is his social media postings, his membership in the OTO at one point. He admitted that. So it's only a mystery to people who haven't read his stuff or read my books. Like he actually did one of the same rituals Crowley did while he was in jail. It was called I can't remember now. Crowley did it in Boliskin Manor, but it's kind of a long actual. It takes a lot of prep and stuff like that. But when Crowley did it, he said that he had all these kind of like beings showing up on his porch and stuff. And Boliskin was supposedly haunted, even when Jimmy Page had it and had a steward there.
Led Zeppelin guitarist Jimmy Page bought Boleskine House, which sat atop Loch Ness, in the early 1970s due to his interest in Aleister Crowley. He may have only visited there a handful of times, as he claimed bad vibes ran through the property. Crowley, who bought the house strictly to meet the demands of his Abermelon working, wrote, "The demons and evil forces had congregated round me so thickly that they were shutting off the light. It was a comforting situation. There could be no more doubt of the efficiency of the operation." I heard that, yeah. And then it finally burnt down. I'd heard those
It's the
stories.
Abramelin working. It's called the magic of Abramelin the mage.
So he
So that
conjured some
ties
kind
it
of
together.
demon? That was the aim of it?
Crowley did, yeah. He opened it up. He never finished it. It's supposed to be like a 6-month ritual or something like that, where at the end you get some kind of benefit. But Crowley never finished it, but Eccles did it while he was in jail. He admitted it in his own book.
Didn't you say that he attributed his getting out of jail to the magic he performed while he was in jail?
I think he said, "I got out due to magic, magic, magic." I'd have to go back and learn. I don't know what he said verbatim. He didn't credit the law. He didn't credit the evidence. He didn't credit anything, but it is, yeah, it's an extraordinary event. He was in there for 18, 19 years.
And then his following, just look across the landscape of pop culture. You've got like Johnny Depp, different actors who they seem to embrace the occult. Whether or not they're openly practicing it is something I don't know, but by association with people like Eccles, we can assume Johnny Depp maybe is some kind of practitioner. And then the people who are in music, there's a guy called Mark Devlin.
Yeah, I know Mark Devlin. Yeah,
Okay, yeah. He does a lot of interesting work about occult symbology in music, and you just wonder, are they doing this because they're subjugated, and it's part of the deal that they're making? Lucifer wants to be represented on the planet.
I sold my soul to the devil. I know it's a crappy deal.
Or is it actual magic being worked?
Right, or both.
Or both, yeah.
Right. So it's a magical act. A lot of these guys, their creative process is a magical act. My understanding is Depp actually tries to get possessed to become these characters that he does. So he uses these kind of techniques, and he knows a lot. And he's been in pretty heavy duty kind of occult films, whether it's the Harry Potter one or the Ninth Gate or some of these other ones. What's the other one? He's on there making like a full-on like magical gesture. I forgot the name of it. Strange Days or Strange Evenings. I forgot what it was. Yeah, Mark Devlin. What was his book?
What was his book? Musical Truth, Volume
Musical
1,
Truth,
2.
right.
I think he's got the third one out now.
I think he does too, yeah. I talked to him when I was working for Ed Opperman Report. I should reach out to him again, see what he's up to. He could guest.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about. Oh, it was just back to Abramovich. She claims to be somewhat of a magician / artist.
I think so.
How does she represent herself? And just her associations, they're far and wide, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Lady Gaga, Kanye West, Jay-Z, the richest people in the world, Soros sons. It just goes on and on and on. A lot of designers. She's influential with kind of like some of the heads of these big design houses, Balenciaga.
So all these influential people, right? Magic aside, what is it that is attractive about these ideas, right? Even if she's just trying to present art, the embodiment of this avant-garde stuff, I just really don't understand the attraction. And I don't understand, like I said, if it points to a political system or a way of life, it would be a messy way of life. It would be kind of unsustainable, irresponsible, just a debased life. I really don't get it. But if, on the other hand, there's magic involved and there's some kind of transfer of power, then that would make more sense to me. Do you understand?
I think it's the same
happening?
thing with Crowley. Like Crowley's promising people inspiration, knowledge, power. So all kind of worldly things, I think, is why people get involved in magic. Power over your enemies, all that stuff. So I think that's the allure. That's the kind of temptation, right? It's like, oh, wow, I want to be at the top of my game. I want to be at the best of whatever I'm doing. And I can do this and do these rituals and get inspired by evil spirits or something. Some people make that thing.
The idea that these affiliations with people like Abramovich or different sorcerers through time, ultimately, though they want to present it as art or as a political idea, really what's on offer is power. That's kind of the assumption that we're both making, it sounds like.
I think so.
They do get rewarded in the way that Jesus was offered a reward for basically yielding to Satan's will, right? And that kind of thing is still going on today.
I think so. I think if
Yeah.
you look at Podesta and what he was doing, I mean, he was the chief of staff for that whole campaign, 2016. So
What was he doing? So I heard he
well,
had
he had
this.
the spirit cooking, right? And she's fully like has pig's blood and stuff like that. There was mentions of Thelema in his emails, right? So somebody mentioned it.
Thelema is the religion founded by Aleister Crowley. According to Crowley, he achieved contact with a spiritual being named Aiwass, who subsequently dictated Crowley's The Book of the Law, which outlines the principles of Thelema. Adherents to Thelema are called Thelemites, and phenomenon within the scope of Thelema are termed thelemic.
A lot of sketchy stuff.
And you can't talk about that because you just get called crazy or conspiracy theorist. The whole Pizzagate, right?
Yeah. Well, they had to twist it, right? So they had to kind of twist it and say that there was all these Pizzagate people believe that there was a jail cell under the pizza place where Hillary Clinton was raping babies. No, I didn't say that, but that's what they want everybody to believe, right?
Well, that's kind of
there's
the
a lot of
function.
stuff.
Yeah.
They found out that Hunter Biden was hanging out there. You know, people didn't know what Hunter Biden was up to until recently. But he there's times where he was at that pizza place. What's he doing around there too? Yeah.
So that was the function of Q or things like it. That's out of the playbook, right? Where you're doing things and then you create a scenario where people are accusing you of doing other bad things that you're not actually doing, and then you just throw the whole baby out with the bathwater.
There you go, exactly. It's a great deflection tactic. Go back and look at Jimmy Comet's original Instagram posts. They're incredible. There's all kinds of weird statements.
I never looked at it. So was that came out with Julian Assange's stuff, or was
that's what it led to? So it started with they got Julian Assange dropped the leaked Podesta emails. And then people went through it, and then they're like, what's all this? We're going to meet at this pizza place. Then somebody went to the pizza place, and then they found the Instagram. So it was just following the breadcrumbs back. And so that's what they found. That was all the stuff. And then it became Pizzagate. But that place is sketchy. What was it? Elephantis is like one of the top 50 most powerful people in Washington, D.C. Well, how does a guy who owns a pizza place be the 50 most powerful people in D.C. amongst super powerful people? Doesn't make sense. Why would they even put that? That was in the number one I think it was the Washingtonian or something. Like it was the number one magazine of Washington.
We found a January 2012 GQ article listing the 50 most powerful people in D.C. And on that list, at number 49, was James Alefantis. He's described as being a restaurateur and bon vivant.
Bon vivant. I know many say bon vivant, but that's not really great. Doesn't sound genuine at all.
Sincerest apologies. The explanation of Alefantis' placement among the most powerful individuals in the nation's capital is as follows. Liberal 20-somethings in khakis drink beer and eat pizza at Alefantis-owned Comet Ping Pong. More established progressives wine and dine next door at Alefantis-owned Buck's Fishing Camping. Alefantis is also the board president of Transformer, the contemporary art gallery that shamed the Smithsonian for removing an installation offensive to right-wingers. When it comes to D.C. radical chic, Alefantis is unsurpassed. If you don't know him, you aren't wearing your scarf right. It's like like Epstein. How did he rise to power except through his influence, right? The control he had over these people, whatever he was providing them.
No, they were blackmailing everybody. They had great blackmail operations. Nobody's really gone through and shown the operations, but there's enough just to sketch people out. Like they had senators, they had governors, they were blackmailing everybody.
That makes sense. Really that seems like the obvious.
And they put him in power. I mean, it was incredible. You can look. Giuffre wrote her own biography of her whole experience, and it was included in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. So it was going back to 2016, 2018. So you can read her biography and say who she was sent to sleep with, right? And in some of those, it's incredible. She was Richardson was the governor of New Mexico. So she was supposedly slept with him when she was younger, controlled 17 or 18 or 16. And so he goes on to become the guy at the UN, right? So they've got stuff on him So they know him, whoever sent that out. And then the other one was Mitchell, Senator Mitchell. Like, you can go Mitchell. She supposedly slept with him when she was younger. And the heir to the king, right? Prince Andrew. But follow Mitchell's career. So this is like 2000. She's with Mitchell, and Mitchell goes on to like be the negotiator for the Israeli-Palestinian peace conference or something like that in like 2010 or 2012. So they've got stuff on him. Go see a picture of him. There's a picture of Mitchell, Clinton, the Palestinian head, and Netanyahu all sitting together on like Wikipedia. You can see it. I'm just like, wow, this is incredible. So they blackmailed him too. So they were blackmailing people who they wanted to be in power, in negotiating power or positions of power. That's just one example. That's just like tip of the iceberg. That's nothing. Because there were 40 or 50 other girls, right? Or 100 other girls. I mean, gosh, no, who knows what they have on Gates and all those other characters. My understanding is like, somebody told me, which I find credible, the day before or the 2 days before, I think Epstein was found dead on a Sunday morning. But apparently there were parties in Hollywood Hills before he died because everybody knew that they were going to grease him. They were going to kill him over that night. So they were happy. So there were groups of people like happy because they were going to be freed. So hopefully from the blackmail that he had on them. So they were all partying down, waiting for the event. Imagine like that's total like eyes wide shut inside stuff, you know. They couldn't allow him to live. He's not in Israel or somewhere else.
Why didn't he have the kill switch that I've heard people reference? He could have enabled
he might have
kill switch,
he might have.
Right?
But I mean,
he didn't protect himself. A
lot of those people didn't know they were probably being blackmailed on that at an industrial level. So once they realized it through his arrest, and then like people, you got blackmailed too. You got blackmailed, Bob. You got blackmailed, John. There's a bunch of dudes with wives and kids who were sweating bullets before he got killed because if their information came out, you know, it would be a disaster for their reputation, their business. It actually happened to a guy. I think the head of Barclays Bank lost his job when they realized how closely connected he was to Epstein. So people were sweating. So he had to go. Epstein had to go. They just thought he was a freewheeling, fun guy. Fun-loving Jeff, you know. He can fix things for me. I can get things from him. He's got interesting friends in the modeling business. But then they're like, hold on. His whole place in the mansion was in New York, was rigged with video cameras. You should go see like the list of people. People talk about the island. Think about how many people were in his mansion in New York City. Because he could just, you know, get the local glitterati or local cognoscenti or whatever you want to call it, could have come over for dinner and what else, you know? So, and she said, and Drew Frey said a lot of bad stuff happened at that museum. So it was deep. It was very deep.
So assuming that a lot of these people who are gathered there with Epstein are also occultists or affiliated with different societies, is that a safe assumption to make?
I think so, to a certain extent, absolutely.
It made me wonder, you know, how much of this story. First, it made me say, why are we even privy to this information unless it's this revelation of the method practice? Could that be what we know they intend for us to know because they...
No. I don't think so. I think that they would have kept that whole thing quiet. I think it was supposed... I mean, those guys were going to the island on weekends and stuff like that. People knew that. Like, they knew that before they realized the enormity of the Epstein situation. So there are like quotes from like Bill Maher, like, is going to the island this weekend, see Russian women. So they were bringing people in for that whole thing. It was like a pleasure palace, you know. It was really a honeypot, but wow. I think that a lot of that stuff was even known. So how much they want you to know, I think that there's definitely guys out there in the Epstein story trying to make sure the public understanding is not broader than it is. Just like I told you, nobody I know knows the Bill Mitchell or has discussed the Bill Mitchell Richardson context because it was huge, because there's like probably another 100 guys. It's incredible power lever, right? If you have owned somebody and you get them into power, they're going to do what you want, you know? So I think the blackmail's always been around. There's that whole book by Whitney Webb, right? One Nation Under Blackmail. I think that's accurate.
Yeah, I haven't read that. I've heard her talk though. I'm just looking for a unifying theory, right? For me, it's just that Lucifer is kind of the puppet master, and And I just assume there are people in every organization that know ultimately who they're serving. But maybe that's not right. I don't know.
There's definitely inside baseball. Like it's a uniparty. They know each other. They may come to agreements on certain things. Some of them all have been puppeteered by intelligence agency. I think Congress is kind of like, so it's supposed to be the primary power, but there's much more powerful institutions now than Congress, and that is the Fed and the CIA. So how people perceive it, the public perceives what's going on. And I bet all of the judges on the Supreme Court, they make some very strange decisions sometimes. So they're probably blackmailed too. People are trying to blackmail them.
Yeah.
And the presidents too. Presidents have probably all been selected over the last 30 years at least. Yeah. At least since maybe Kennedy or Carter.
That was another big flag for me. I was never a Trump supporter. I was always just kind of appalled at our choices. Even as a kid, I remember I went to Bush Senior's inauguration. The Beach Boys sang on the one, but
1988.
It must have been, yeah, not somewhere around there when Doug Williams won the Super Bowl too. I remember both of those. But then I just remember, I guess there was Clinton next, but then it was like when Bush Jr. came up as a candidate, it just felt weird to me. It seemed I wouldn't have known this word at that time, but it's nepotism, right? It felt like it's like, is this a monarchy? Like in this whole country full of all these bright people, can't we find somebody else? Like every kindergartner knows that, you get somebody else a turn. And so that was the first time I remember just feeling put off by the choices that we have for president and still never becoming really overinvested in any of it. My ability to manipulate political outcomes as a voter, I'm never really excited about that. But now I would say it just feels like a charade, the whole thing, especially when Donald Trump was the. It just seemed like that had to be an intentional gag almost. So it feels like this magic we're talking about, where it's like they just show you something ridiculous and pass it off as the truth, which it's actually happening. But I guess where the lie is that that's what's best for us, or that we somehow have participated in his arrival or in these people's ascending to power. I don't know. It just feels like a sham to me.
Probably is. I think the public perception of history is intentionally set.
I heard you mention recently in one of your interviews with somebody that, and you didn't, I've never heard you share what this is, but I think I've heard you refer to it a couple times. Maybe it's not something that you want to discuss, but if it is, I'd love to hear it. I'm trying to think of the context in which I most recently heard you talk about it. It might have been talking to Joe Atwell, kind of towards the end of that chat you guys had. Basically, I think you had kind of provided a defense of Crowley's sincerity in doing magic, and then you were putting forth that you yourself come from a biblical worldview and that you do believe in sort of the supernatural realm. And then
Yeah,
you
no
mentioned,
doubt.
yeah, and you mentioned that you had experiences that couldn't be explained by the natural world or a naturalistic worldview. But I don't think I've ever heard you say what those experiences are.
And I've had a lot. Some I'll never tell, but I've had pretty intense deja vu, at least that. But I've definitely like had responses to prayers. So I mean, they're some things you just can't mention. So
Right. Yeah.
God.
Okay. I understand that. I think I would feel the same way about maybe sharing things that were personal between me and God, things that he's done for me that,
I'll tell you
I
this,
hold as
like I
sacred.
wasn't really, I mean, I grew up in a Christian family. I wasn't really like a believer. I wasn't like one of those kids who was like a pastor's kid or something. I went to church, I listened, I did what I was told. But I would say like when I really was curious about what's the real nature of reality, when I was trying to figure things out, when I was 17, like I put my hand up to see if God was there, and the hand was already there. The hand was already there. So, he was waiting for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's the most important thing, right? The desire for truth, at least that I'm aware of. It's more important than our desire to be wealthy or healthy or really anything, right? Because the truth is what sets us free. Jesus
True.
described himself as the truth. But the truth, that's what we're after, right? And that's what you made a career out of pursuing. And
Kind of have. I kind of have.
yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks for having me. It's good talking with you.
Yep, you too, William.
All right.
All right.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
Cheers. Bye.
This episode of the Outskirts Podcast was brought to you in part by the Drifting Pinions Podcast. It's poetry and meditations on faith. If you're into that sort of thing, check it out.
It is discouraging to read a recent authoritative Soviet text on military strategy and find on page after page wholly baseless and incredible claims, such as the allegation that American imperialist circles are preparing to unleash different types of war, that there is a very real threat of a preventative war being unleashed by American imperialists against the Soviet Union, and that the political aims, and I quote, of the American imperialists are to enslave economically and politically the European and other capitalist countries and to achieve world domination by means of aggressive war, unquote. Truly, as it was written long ago, the wicked flee when no man pursueth. Yet it is sad to read these Soviet statements to realize the extent of the gulf between us. But it is also a warning to the American people not to fall into the same trap as the Soviets, not to see only a distorted and desperate view of the other side, not to see conflict as inevitable, accommodation as impossible, and communication as nothing more than an exchange of threats. No government or social system is so evil that its people must be considered as lacking in virtue.